All right, so to go over this again, next steps is 3 weeks. So the fourth week of every month, we're going to be doing some leadership training, okay? And we'll have it in here. We'll also be recording them, which we're doing right now. So if you can't attend the fourth week or you want to watch this again, it'll be available online. All right, so since this is our first one, we're going to start really basic, and we're going to talk about what does a leader look like. That's what we're going to be going over today. So we went around the room, and I asked, what does a leader look like? And once again, this is interactive, so it's not a sermon. So go ahead. If I ask a question, that means you can actually answer it. They're not rhetorical. So since we have some new people in the room, what does a leader look like to you guys?
Someone who takes charge.
Takes charge. Right. Simple. A leader leads, right? Leadership, they lead. No, that's good. That's my first bullet point. So, what else?
Be effective.
Effective, right?
Caring.
Caring, absolutely.
Honest.
Yeah, honest. The man said integrity earlier, kind of goes hand in hand. Absolutely. So these are some of the characteristics of a leader. And what we're going to go over today, obviously it applies to yourself first. Because sometimes when you hear something like this, you're like, oh yeah, I wish so-and-so could hear this information. I wish my boss got this. But once again, apply it to yourself, and then you can apply it to others. But before we go into what a leader is, let's dive into some of the myths about leadership. All right, and the first myth is leaders are born, not made. Have you heard that before? There's a born leader. And I like watching John Maxwell. A lot of my stuff today is going to come from John Maxwell. And he always gets, are all leaders born? And his response is, well, of course they're born. Right? I mean, come on. But the underlying theme is that these leaders have it when they're born. And I get it. I mean, we do spiritual giftings in step 2. There is a gifting in leadership, and you can have like a leaning towards leadership, but that doesn't mean that you can't develop it yourself. Okay? So myth number 1 is leaders are born, not made. And the idea, too, is if you couldn't learn it, then you wouldn't be here today. And I wouldn't be talking to you today. Does that make sense? So obviously, we can learn it. The second is leadership is a rare skill. So what is leadership? What is leading? Well, John Maxwell defines it as influence. Okay? So the idea is there are a ton of leaders. People are influencing other people all the time. The question is are you influencing well? Right? So it's not necessarily a rare skill, but it's rarely taught. I went through, I was a business major, and they teach management, but management and leadership is 2 totally different things. When you look at the definition, they're very similar, but one has a connotation, like management has a connotation of just task-oriented, getting things done, where leadership more is motivating, inspiring, casting a dream, and following that. Does that make sense? So leadership is rarely taught. Ask yourself, how much time have you spent developing your leadership? How many courses have you gone to? Has your job taught courses on it? And that's why we're starting to do that here, because we realize, you know what? We need to teach it, right? Another myth is leadership is only at the top. I hear this probably more than any other of these myths is, well, when I get into that position, then I'll learn leadership. That is a myth. Why? Because, well, once again, if we go back to the definition, leadership and leading is influence. You're already in a leadership position, whether you believe it or not, right? And in step 3, we actually go over that, the 5 levels of leadership. I'll touch on it a little bit later. But we all are we have different relationships, right? A marriage, you're influencing, right? If you're a parent, you're influencing. At your work, you're influencing. At church, you're influencing, right? With your friends, you're influencing. So you're already in these positions, whether you want to believe it or not. And there's different layers of leadership, different positions. So right now, you should be developing your leadership. And because leadership is not in position, it's influence, you could actually influence up, right? John Maxwell wrote a book called 360-Degree Leader or whatever. So the idea is you should be influencing everyone around you, and just because you don't have the position doesn't mean you're not the influencer. And John Maxwell, because he was a pastor, he realized that at his first pastoral job, he realized during his first meeting, there was a gentleman in his congregation, when they'd ask everything, they'd all look to him and not John Maxwell. And then he realized, wow, this person is the influencer. This person is the real leader. So then obviously John had to learn how to lead the leader. Does that make sense? So it's not positional based, okay? The 4th myth is all leaders are charismatic. That's a myth. You tend to maybe know the charismatic ones, but before I go further into this, when you think of charismatic, what do you think of? Not Bill Gates, okay. That just proves the point, though. He's obviously a leader, but not that charismatic. So when you think of charismatic, what do you think of?
When I think charisma, they think someone that gets on stage or someone that,
Yeah. So charismatic, most people think it's extroverted, and it has nothing to do with extroverted or introverted. Because there are some extroverted people who are loud, boisterous, they think they're the life of the party, but they're just obnoxious. Or they always talk about themselves and they become very boring, right? Maybe when you meet them, but then after a while it becomes stale. So charismatic has a sense of like, when they're around, you feel good. And the reason why is because they're other people focused. Charismatic people are other people focused. So when somebody meets you, they're asking about you. They're trying to find about you. They're not telling about themselves. Right? So we were doing, we were making care packages for homeless people. And afterwards, we're all sitting around eating lunch. And there is a woman that was talking. And the first story was funny, but then she kept talking, and then kept talking. And then we all kind of were looking at each other like, is she going to just keep talking? You see how that turned from like, oh, okay, to like boring really quick? Not letting people relate to the story, not letting them say anything about the story, it just got stale really quick. So charismatic people are other people focused. Right? When they walk into the room, they're looking to connect with other people. Where a not charismatic person would be more self-focused. Well, why isn't anyone talking to me? I wonder if people are going to be nice in this room, right? When they actually do start offering, they start talking about themselves, okay? So, charisma, if you're people-oriented, and you're likable, charisma will get you in the door, right? I like this person, right? They're asking about me. I feel good about them. But that's about as far as it'll go. And the 5 levels of leadership, that's like level 2. That'll be the cap, right? Which is the relational level. I like you, but that's about it. It's credibility and character that will keep you there, right? So if you had to choose between charisma and character, I'd probably choose character. And that's why in step 3 also, we want to make sure that your character is built before you start learning leadership skills. All right, because there has been some great leaders, right? Like you would say maybe Stalin or Hitler, right? They learned some great leadership skills, but lacking in the character department. Does that make sense? And it didn't end well for them in the end, right? Okay, so we want to make sure we're developing our character. And then, so speaking of character, how would you define character? And we're going to develop it.
Qualities and morals of one.
Yeah, qualities. So, in today's message, Pastor John was talking about Daniel, how he developed his qualities, right? That was our base verse for the 4 Faces of God small group that we did, right? Because he developed his qualities. They weren't gifts. They weren't given. He wasn't born with it. He developed them. So, the small group, but in life you can apply it. If you have to develop qualities, if you have to develop yourself in an image, probably the image of God, right? And that's what the 4 Faces of God was. We talked about that. So, to summarize that, basically, you want to have love for God, love for others, and that creates courage in you. You want to have a boldness, but at the same time, you want to do things excellently, and you want to have a good attitude. All right, so another myth is leaders controlled by manipulation or force, power. Maybe you've had a boss like this, right? That's level 1 leadership, where they're in a position and they can fire you, so they use that as kind of a tool. Not a very good, effective leadership, right? Because when somebody manipulates you, how do you feel? You want to get out of there, right? And you're going to try to get out of there as soon as possible. So we don't like that. Obviously, we shouldn't be doing that to other people. And the idea of manipulation is you're using them. So to kind of, the difference between manipulation and motivation is manipulation is moving people for the leader's advantage. Motivation is moving people for everyone's advantage. Does that make sense? So, and if you've been through, some business courses and they talk about management, they just talk about styles, and there's like the 50 style of management where you ridicule, you make fun of, you manipulate, and that is a very hard way to lead, right? I see this with parents sometimes. If they're constantly threatening their kids, it's a very hard way to lead your kids, because you have to constantly do that, right? And once again, that's level 1 leadership level. It's positional. You're always threatening them, right? Now, sometimes, like if it's a kid, maybe you have to punish them, but the idea is, if that's where you're staying with everything, that is not good. It's very exhausting. You have to use a lot of effort, right? So we want to use motivation instead of manipulation. Does that make sense? So what makes a leader, or what is a leader? So if you listen to John Maxwell, he loves using acronyms and stuff like that. So I'm going to use some acronyms, and I like it because it's easier to remember, right? When I take tests, I create acronyms to help remember the answers, right? So the first acronym is leader. So the L, right, in leader is leadership. And basically, leaders, when they lead, it's moving people. We talked about that. But you have to understand the value of leadership. Everything rises and falls on leadership. All right, and John Maxwell has a concept called the law of the lid. And that means the organization will only grow to the level of the leader. There's no more it can grow, right? And this is why we see this in sports. When a team is struggling, they don't fire the quarterback or the running back or the middle linebacker. They fire the coach, right? Because they realize they can only get so far, right? So is leadership important? Absolutely, because there's a, if you're a level 5 leader, your organization will be only level 5 or below, right? So, but if you learn and you get it to a level 7, now, things can expand, right? So, understanding the value of leadership, and then you want to make a commitment to learn. I feel like commitment, most people don't like that word these days. But you want to make a commitment to learn how to lead.
Are we on the acronyms? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so we're still on L.
We're still on L, okay.
Mm-hmm. So this is the basics on leadership, on leading. So make a commitment to learn how to lead. What will that entail? Whenever you make a commitment, there's a cost, right? And I think that's why people don't like making commitments, right? So what are some of the costs to learning how to lead? Well, one is you're going to have to change. Most people just resist change. That's why they keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, even though they know it's not good for them, but the pain of change is hard for them. But you're going to have to change what you're doing. There's a cost of time. Like if you're going to learn how to lead, you're going to invest some time, right? In reading books. Right now is an investment of time. It's not going to be much time, 20 minutes, 30 minutes a month isn't much, right? So you should be investing more time outside of this. And if you look at, they did a study, and this was a few years ago, but the top companies spent 20% of their resources minimum on research and development. Because they knew that they needed to do that to stay ahead. Well, think about your finances. Do you spend 20% of your finances in R&D? Maybe you don't now, okay? But there's a cost of dollars as well, right? Because you have, buying books and things like that. Cost in friendships. Some people, if you're moving in a certain direction, there's some people that are just not going to want to move in that direction. And you're going to have to let them go. And it's okay. But once again, there's sometimes a tendency to just want to be likable. So it's like, I want that person to like me, so I don't want to ruffle their feathers or whatever. But if you want to learn leadership, there's some people that you just have to avoid because they're just not going to go where you're going. And that's okay. It's the best for both of you. And maybe that's why they say it's lonely at the top. Have you heard that? Right? But I would add to that, it's lonely at the top, so you better know why you're there. Right? It's going to cost options and freedom. Now you might be like, come on, Jeff. Come on, that's why I want to be a leader, right? Because if I'm the top dog, the CEO, that's what I have is options and freedom, right? Isn't that why I'm doing that? No. when you become a leader, you can no longer do what you want to do. And some of that statement right there might knock you out. This might be the last time I see you in this meeting. And that's okay. Right? For you. But the idea here is you can no longer do what you want to do. You have to do what's best for the people. If that means only getting 2 hours of sleep, then that's what it is. I really can't say it any other way, right? That's a cost, options and freedom. So that's a commitment, right? There's cost. You have to determine that, and that's why a statement of why you're getting into leadership, what's on your heart, what's your goal, what's your passion, and if obviously the higher the level, the easier it is to lead. So there's a commitment on the front end, but then it gets easier down the road, right? But the third thing about leading is you just have to start leading. And it's never too late either, right? Look when Moses, when did he start leading? 80. But good thing he did. He got millions of people out of slavery because he decided to actually lead. Does that make sense? And was there a cost for him? Yeah, he gave up his comfort, for sure. But it was worth it. So you want to start leading, and that's the best way to learn. We talked about, writing is good and all, but the best way is to do, right? So, and once again, the 5 levels of leadership. And if you haven't gone through that, or if you don't remember what that is, come to step 3. And we will go over that. It'll make sense. We will have that up online pretty soon as well, so you could rewatch that. But come to step 3 and you'll learn about it, because I keep referencing it and I don't have time to go over that today. But the idea is you can start leading people today. You can start leading your friends, family, right? Start doing it. And then develop yourself. Because who's the first person you should lead? You. And if you can't lead yourself, why on earth would anybody else follow you? Absolutely. So if you wouldn't follow yourself, why would others? Right? So the idea here is you want to develop yourself, then develop others. Then lead yourself, lead others. And then you want to lead others to develop others, and then ultimately lead others to lead others. Right? And that was the scripture that's on the front of our next steps. The one that was really on Pastor Justin's heart to start this church was 2 Timothy 2:2. Right? And Paul is talking to the person he's leading, Timothy. Right? That's why it's called Timothy, 2 Timothy. It's the second letter to Timothy. And it says, now take these reliable truths that I've given to you and pass them on to others, right? Who will then do the same pretty much. So that's the spirit behind this, is you want to lead others, but it all has to start with developing yourself, right? So, and he's got a fun story about leadership, because leadership is hard and developing yourself is hard, right? And as a leader, you're dealing with other people's junk, right? So he saw a pastor friend, his name was Stuart, and they went up through ministry together, right? And he was a pastor, and he saw him, he says, hey, how's it going? What are you doing? And he's like, oh, I'm a funeral director now. He's like, Stuart, what happened? You were a pastor, And he's like, well, as a pastor, I met with Bill, and Bill had a drinking problem, and met with him, and met with him, and met with him, and guess what? Still got problems, right? And then I met with, Susie, and she was dealing with anxiety, and she was always worried, and I dealt with her, and she still got problems, right? And then I was working with this marriage, and this couple, they're always fighting and fighting, and guess what? They're still fighting. He's like, so the reason why I like being a funeral director is because when I straighten them out now, they stay straight. But that's the idea, is you develop yourself, you learn how to overcome things, you help people learn how to overcome things. Not everybody follows, not everybody gets it, but some will, and that some will is enough. All right? So that was all kind of under the L. Now this is where it gets fun. We're going to go into the E, and the E has a acronym within itself. So that's good. So the E stands for equip. And the equip itself is an acronym. So the E there is evaluate. So when you're going to equip somebody, you got to evaluate, are they worth your time equipping? Right. And one of the main things you want to make sure that they're going to do is they're going to pass on what you're teaching them. Because if they're not going to pass it on, then there's no multiplication. Right? Once again, addition is very hard. Right? So you want to evaluate. And that's tough because you don't know. I mean, best guess, you could look at maybe their track record, you could look at their resume, you could ask them certain questions, but you really don't know. The Q in equip is qualify. So this is where you can actually, this is easier because you can actually see what they did. You gave them a job, did they do it? Did they do it well? Right? Did they just try to do bare minimum, or did they exceed expectations? U is you want to unite. So at this point, you want to lock arms with them, right? If they've qualified, they're doing things well, this is where you do things well with them. And then I is invest time. You do not invest time with everyone. Why? Correct. Yeah, people are like, well, you want to treat everyone equally. That's dumb. That's, I don't know who came up with that saying, but that's pretty dumb. All right. Yeah, you don't want to invest your time with everyone because, and there is the Italian economist. He came up with the Pareto principle. That was his name. And it's the 80-20 rule. And when we're leading people, and let's say that we've got 10 people that we're overseeing, and 2 people are just killing it, and then there's 2 people that are struggling, right? Our natural tendency is to spend time with who? The struggling people, right? Because they need it. And if maybe I just give them more time, more direction, more effort. No, because we already told them what to do and they're not doing it. Right? So I get this sometimes. People come with you with a problem and you say, well, try this. And then they come back and say, I'm still trying this problem. And then I ask, did you do that? And they're like, no. I was like, seriously, do not bring this up to me again until you do that. Right? And if they don't do it, right? Because you need to train or trade. Right? Like, if they're not going to listen, they're not going to listen. So you're just spending more and more time with them. you should be spending time with the top 20% of people. Why? Because they're listening and they're doing it and they're excited to do that, right? And that is the simplest way to stay motivated. If you keep talking to the people who need it, it's going to be exhausting for you. And this is how you get burnt out, right? So, all right, so invest time. And then P is provide resources and experiences. You want to give them the tools necessary so they can focus on doing what they're going to do. Does that make sense? And this is why, once again, we're providing this to you guys. This is kind of the on-ramp for that, all right? So that's equip. And the A is, we'll end with the A today. I know I'm creating some tension, so you can't even fill out, what does the rest of leader mean? Come back next month. Yeah. So, yeah. Yeah, so no, we'll probably do this in December anyway, but we'll stream it so you can watch it so we stay in the habit. All right, so A is attitude. Attitude is so important. Man, I can't even express how important attitude is. I would generally do a survey of who do you like the most, or who do you revere the most, and generally it's the person with the best attitude. Right? So attitude determines what? Attitude determines how I see myself, right? You cannot rise higher than how you see yourself. They've done studies on this, and they call it self-sabotaging. So even if things are working well, and for whatever reason you're blessed with opportunities and experiences, if you have a bad attitude, you will self-sabotage. And it's interesting, once again, they've done studies on why people shy away from leadership or shy away from promotions, and you would tend to think it would be fear of failing. But there's also an equally strong fear of success. Why? It's because of how you see yourself. So attitude is very important because, one, it's how you see yourself. Two, it's how you see others. Right? If you're bitter, you're going to see others through that lens. Right? And that's not good, right? If you're trying to influence people and you've got a bad attitude, you're going to see others with that type of lens. Or maybe you'll be a little bit more skeptical, and you'll be questioning what they're doing when their intentions are good, but because you get a bad attitude, you're going to see it differently. Sometimes we get a little self-righteous with our attitude. So then we see... if I'm the best, then you see others is not. And then once again, that's a terrible place to be in. So your attitude also determines how you see your ministry or your church. So I'll use Dave as an example. Dave, he's actually two leaders. He leads the usher team, but he also leads the setup takedown team. And if you're watching online, you may not know, but we're in Florida, and in the summertime, it is hot. But Dave is setting up those signs, right? Now, if he has a bad attitude or a bad day, is he going to be happy when he's sweating, sticking in? And he's smiling because he knows. That is not just like good soil and sand out there. There are rocks and it is nasty, right? It's frustrating. You try to get it in there, right? And he might see it as pointless, worthless. Do I have to set up all of them? And then he starts getting a bad attitude. But those signs have led to more people coming to our church than our Facebook posts, our mail invites, anything like that. Yeah, there's people raising their hands, right? So, yeah. Be careful of your attitude, because your attitude will determine how you see your ministry, your serve team, or the church in general. Sure.
Well, because when we were doing the small group of the face of the ox, it's talking about the four faces of God, and one of them is the ox, which resembles attitude. And Jeff gave us a list of useless attitudes to have, and a lot of the things on this list were very surprising to me.
Before she goes over that, I'll just give a little caveat to this. We tend to say good or bad attitude, and I don't like that, because certain situations, what normally would be a bad attitude is a good attitude. Right? Like anger. Oh, that's a bad attitude. Well, in certain situations, it's good to get angry. Right? Jesus got angry and started flipping over tables. But he didn't sin, right? Be angry without sinning. So we don't want to say good or bad. We want to say useful or useless. Because it depends on the situation. You want an attitude, right? So go ahead.
The most jarring one for me was dutiful. Americans see dutiful as a good thing, and I guess we might also like relate it to like military, like oh, it's your duty or it's your civic duty to vote, things like that. But doing things out of duty, not how you should do things. We talked about like doing things in love because of love, or any other attitude other than dutiful. Oh, I have a duty to my spouse. That doesn't come from the heart, that doesn't come from love. So that was one of the most jarring ones for me. But in the other list of useless attitudes is sarcastic, impatient, bored, conceited, pessimistic, anxious, useless attitude, rude, suspicious is a useless attitude, self-conscious, mocking, embarrassed, critical. Critical attitude.
Yeah, not good.
Then we
And
have useful, right? Warm, enthusiastic, curious, resourceful, helpful, patient, interested, cheerful.
yeah. And to go back, what the original one about dutiful, I think Mary and Martha is the story in the Bible that goes over that. And Jesus is over at their house, at their sisters. And I think it was Martha who was like cooking the food and preparing. And Mary was just sitting there listening to Jesus. So she's like, Jesus, can you tell her to help me out here? And what, if you know this story, what did Jesus say? I won't be here long. She's doing the right thing. Take it easy and come listen to me. Right? So that's kind of dutiful. Is you're doing things and you're not, right? You can get those things done. And it's good to get them done and do things excellently. But you just got to know when to do it, when you're just being dutiful and not. All right? So attitude determines how you see yourself, how you see others, how you see your ministry, your church, and then it also determines how you see your failures. Right? Because, John Maxwell also wrote a book, Failing Forward. But if you have a bad attitude and you fail, sometimes that knocks you right out. Right? Man, yeah, I can go on this a little further, but the idea with your attitude towards failure is, well, first of all, who in here has failed?
Every day.
Today?
Every day
know, that's what I'm saying. So, unfortunately, our school system has ingrained in us that failure is bad, right? Do not fail. And because some people are so afraid to fail, they're afraid to try. Right, how else are you going to learn, right? Absolutely. I mean, you have to start somewhere, right? So you're going to fail. The question is how are you going to fail? So, John Maxwell says, when you fall down, right, and you're down, well, look around. You might as well, while you're down there, pick something up, right? So the idea, too, is sometimes when we fail, we're so embarrassed in that moment that we either want to, like, hide up the fact that you failed, or you want to get up too quickly and you don't analyze what happened to get you there, and then you keep repeating those failures. Does that make sense? So your attitude is important here. And like, people will not follow you long if you have a bad attitude. That's just what I know, right? Because they're not going to see themselves good. They're not going to see you good. They're not going to see their job or their business or their church or their ministry well. And failures are going to be catastrophes, right? And then they get nervous, get anxious, right? You don't want a nervous person when things go bad, right? You want somebody that's calm in that situation. All right, so that's where we're going to end it today. We're going to leave you with a cliffhanger. Come back to find out what D, E, and R stand for.